Honey, do we have any more triple berry jam?
I don't know, let me check. Let's see here. Down to the last one. Guess I'm gonna have to make some more. Hey folks, we're gonna make some triple berry jam today. First, when you make jam, you just need to get all your utensils ready to go. First, you're gonna need a great big water canning pot. Jams, jellies, tomatoes, those kind of things can go in a hot water bath. We'll deal with pressure cooking canning later. You'll need your canning. This is I'm not really sure what it's called, but it's a jar lifter, duh. When you are using your hot water bath and you're pulling your jars out, you're going to need something that's going to be able to let you deal with those hot jars. This is a magnet, it's a lid lifter. When doing the canning process, you're going to have to boil your lids so that they're sterilized, and this will allow you to put this into the boiling water, retrieve that lid, and you'll be able to handle it. This is a spacing utensil. It's also a utensil that you can use to let air bubbles out of whatever you're canning, i.e. vegetables, usually green beans, that kind of thing that might catch some air bubbles in there. You'll want to release those. But for today's purpose, what we'll use is this end of it, and it's measured by a 1/4 inch, a 1/2 inch, a 1/3 inch, an inch, and that's how much space you're going to leave at the top of that jar. In the processing of jams and jellies, it's a 1/4 inch, so it's only going to be that far down. Usually what I do is I actually use my jar, and from right here to the top is a 1/4 inch. So I really don't have to use this tool. I've measured it enough that I know that's a 1/4 inch. You'll want to have your ingredients ready. Today we've got we have blueberries, blackberries, and raspberries. Normally, when I do this jam, I do a quadruple berry, which means I add strawberries to it. And most of the recipes that you'll see will have strawberries, blackberries, and blueberries as your triple berry. But, we're doing Corona canning today, and there were no strawberries. You can use fresh berries. In fact, most people do use fresh berries if they have a ton of them. I don't have that, so I tend to use the frozen berries. They're flash frozen. As soon as they're ripe and ready to go, you just let them thaw out first, and then you can measure them the way you need to. You're going to need that. You're going to need some Sure Gel. Some recipes that you'll see out on the internet will not use it. I use it because I want it to set a little bit more than the natural pectin in the vegetables or the fruits will let you do. And you need a whole lot of sugar. And unfortunately, that's not a step you can skip on. Once you have your equipment prepared, you'll also need your jars that you're going to can in. And the first step for that is washing them really good with hot soapy water. And in just a few minutes, I'll show you the next process. All right, once you've got your jars all washed and ready to go, there's several ways to sterilize your jars, and I tend to do it this way, but you're welcome to do it however you like, as long as you know that you're getting them sterilized. You can use your dishwasher setting. It has a sanitize setting. If I'm going to do that, I would just go ahead and wash the jars, run the sanitize setting, and when it's done, then pull them out. If you're going to do that, though, you need to pull them out as quickly as it's done and fill the jars and can them so that your jars are hot. Because what's going to happen is we're going to be putting a really hot jam or jelly into these jars. Therefore, the jar needs to be hot as well. Otherwise, it's going to break. You can also boil the jars, which a lot of people do, and that was always the old-fashioned way of doing it. But in my years of canning, I looked upon an internet hack, and it's the way that I do it now, and I actually prefer it. It's a lot easier. I don't have to babysit my jars this way. So what I do is I put them on a sheet tray, just like that, and I stick them in my oven. And I set the oven at 250 degrees. Now, if I remember correctly, water boils at 212. So 250, they're going to be sterilized. It's just a matter of how long you leave them in there. There's no too much time. So what I do is I put them in there as soon as I begin. It's going to take me 30, maybe 45 minutes of this process before I'm ready to fill these jars. So when I'm ready to fill the jars are sterilized and ready. Then I also will use my trusty little water kettle, fill that up with water, and also have it on the back burner so that I can use that boiling water to take care of my lids. The next step will be filling your water canner with water. Believe me, it takes a while. It's a great big pot, so just stick it in there, fill her up, and let her go.
How many quarts is that? Is that specific quarts?
I don't know how many quarts it is. Okay. As far as I know, they only come in one size.
Oh, okay.
But they may come in different ones, I don't know. This will take a while, so we'll be right back. Oh, my pot's almost full of water. When you're canning, you need to remember that you're going to be putting several jars that are full of jam into this water. And so the water level is going to rise when you do that. I just kind of do a little gauge by, here's my jar, I put it at the bottom of here, it's even. When I put those other jars in, it's going to end up being about an inch over, and that's what you want. You want your water, once your jars are put into it, to be 1 inch or so above those jars. It can be more, that's fine, but you don't want it to be less. And then this is your wire rack. It will go on top. And when you're ready to fill your jars and place them in, you're going to place them on this rack. So we can go ahead and start the heating process. And that's going to take a while. Obviously, as with any other pot, if you put the lid on, it quickens that just a little bit. Our next step was going to be actually to make the jam. My berries are still just a little bit frozen, so we're going to wait for a few minutes, and then we'll begin that process. All right, now we're going to start the actual jam making process. The important things about jam is to go with a recipe that is proven. What I mean by that is stick with the recipe, don't try to double it, don't try to reduce it. It's just one of those things about jams and jellies that if you start messing with the recipe or the amount of ingredients, 9 times out of 10 it's not going to set. Doesn't mean it's not delicious, you can use it for syrup. But if you want jam, use a recipe. The recipe that I'm using today is basically a double batch, so I'm using 9 cups of frozen fruit, 2 packages of sure gelled pectin, and it will eventually call for 11 cups of sugar. I know that's a lot, but it's being spread out into multiple jars of jams and jelly. You'll know once we get to the very end of this process. But to begin with, this is what you do. The fruit's in the pot, the pectin's in the pot, the trash is in the trash, and the pot goes on the stove. This has to heat to boiling and boil for a minute before you can add the sugar. These berries are still partially frozen, so this process is going to take just a few minutes, but we'll be right back. And as with every normal cook, I forgot one step. We have to add some lemon. Jams and jellies and tomatoes all can be canned with a hot water bath because they're high in acid. Since I'm using only fruit this time, I need to add just a little bit of acid. And for this amount of fruit, I'm going to add 1/4 cup of lemon juice. So once you get your lemon juice done, just pour it into the pot where the fruit and the pectin are boiling, or getting ready to boil, and you're ready to go. Now we'll go to the next step. All right, one more step here. We're cooking along with gas. As your berries are coming up to a boil, go ahead and take your good old-fashioned potato masher and start mashing them up just a little bit. This way you'll get that jam consistency instead of a bunch of berries in a little bit of juice that's thickened. As soon as I get this done and this comes to a boil, I'll be right back.
Okay.
All right, our jam mixture, that's the fruit and the pectin and the lemon juice, is now at a rolling boil. A rolling boil is when your mixture is boiling, and when you stir it, it doesn't stop boiling. You know how a lot of times you'll have a soft boil going and you stir it and it stops, and then it gradually comes back to a boil? That's not a rolling boil. A rolling boil, as I said, is when you stir and it continues to boil. When you're at that phase, you let it go for a minute, which I've been letting mine do, and then you add the sugar. As I said, this is 11 cups of sugar, and I know that's a lot of sugar, but it's going to be a lot of jam. There are the first 8 cups, and another 3. All right, all of that goes in the pot. And you basically now stir this until it dissolves and comes back to a boil. In the meantime, our water the kettle is now hot and ready to go. It's boiling. I just turned it off a little bit, so it's kind of simmering in there, so it's not making a lot of noise. But we take that, we pour it over our jar lids, and they are hot and boiling and sterilizing while we wait on this to come back to a boil. Be right back. Alrighty, all my sugar's dissolved and this mixture is now at a rolling boil, so I'm going to turn that off. The water in my big pot is boiling and it's ready to go. So I'm going to toss in about a half a cup of vinegar, and the only reason I do that is I found that it prevents all of that white deposit buildup from the water that ends up on your cans. This just kind of helps that not happen quite so much. Now I'm going to take my hot jars out of the oven. And I'm going to start filling them up. Now you'll notice I've got 9 jars of one size and 1 of another. In the canner, when I'm canning, I want to use the same size jars. So, what I'm going to start with are all these 1.5 pint jars, and that's what I'm going to fill up. If I have any left over, it will go into the big jar, and that I'll just put in the refrigerator and we'll eat that first. So for the canning process, you'll also need a funnel, and if you buy a canning kit, it's going to come in your kit. And you'll need some type of cup, mug, measuring scoop, something to be able to dip this hot liquid out of. Now, you can have your kids around, but this is probably not a safe thing for the children just because this mixture is boiling, boiling hot. And you know how hot, sticky substances are. They don't just wash right off. So if for some reason they get burnt, it's going to be a bad burn. So be careful with your children, be careful with your pets, and be careful with yourself. Just dump some of this liquid. You put your funnel right into your jar. Try to not make a mess with your liquid as much as possible. And then pour it right into the jar. And as we said earlier, we got to leave a 1/4 of an inch head space is what they call that space. And we know that that's going to be all the way up to that little edge. Put it to the next one and continue filling them up. Be right back. Alright, as you can see, I have all my jars filled. Yes, it's a messy venture, but it's well worth it. Obviously, this particular jar, I got a little bit too full, so we're just going to pull a little bit of it out. And that's good. Now, for your jars to seal properly, they have to be clean on the very top of them. This edge where it meets that seal has to be clean. And if you're messy like me, you always have to do this job. You usually have to do this job anyway because sometimes you just cannot see. Doesn't really matter what's on the bottom of the jar, but I'll clean it too before I stick it in my water. That is good and clean. You use your little lifter, pull one of your lids out of your hot water, put that lid right on top, and then close it up. Screw it tight. You don't have to wrench it tight, but just make sure it's tight. And then I'm going to clean off the bottom just a little bit. And it's going to go right into my hot water here. And it's going to sit there while I finish all these other jars. Be right back. Alright, I've got all of them filled. They're all sitting in the top of my little rack here. So now we're going to just drop them. Pull it off the sides. Drop it into the water, or gently lower it into the water. And as you recall, this water was rolling, boiling. It's already beginning to boil. Again, put the lid on it and set your timer for 10 minutes. If for some reason the water were not starting to boil immediately, you wait until it begins to boil again, then you set the timer. It has to be under the timer, boiling for 10 minutes. As I mentioned while I was filling my jars, I had probably enough left over to fill one more jar, but you know it's good stuff, so I decided to leave one out. We'll just go ahead and put a lid on it and let it sit here and cool. And it'll go right into the refrigerator, and that's what we'll start eating. And all these others will actually go into the pantry, and they'll be ready for another rainy day. Be right back. Okay, 10 minutes are gone. Shut off our timer. Shut off our stove. And you can kind of do it a couple of different ways. A lot of people will just let it sit there and cool off a little bit. I tend to just take them right out. And very carefully pull them up. Start cooling off and draining. They may start sealing any time now. There's a very distinctive sound of the jar sealing. You'll know it when you hear it. It's kind of a ping. It's kind of a sound. You'll know it when you hear it. But that's what you want to hear. There you go. There was one. There's another. And those are telling me that they are sealing, which means it's a good can, it's a good seal. These are going to last for a while. And what I tend to do is try to pull them across from each other, just to try to get it where they're not off balance and falling everywhere. And as you pull them out, just dab off that extra water that's on top. Put them right onto a rack, something like this, that's got some air circulation that can circulate underneath them. You set them down on here, you wipe off the water, and then you don't move them for 24 hours. That's what the recipe says. I'm sure 20's fine, but You just want them to sit long enough where they're totally cool and ready to be put away. Wipe off this extra water. And then you just let them cool and we'll check for the seals. I don't know if you can see it, but this particular lid, in the sunlight, you can see the little indentation. That means it's sealed. Some of these others haven't sucked it back in yet, and they're like that one. You can kind of almost see it's almost raised a little bit. As it cools, it's going to suck down and it's going to look just like that. And when they look like that, they're ready to be put up. If for some reason that doesn't go down, and when it's cool, you can touch it and it's going to move, it's not sealed. That jam is fine. You need to go ahead and eat it, put it in the refrigerator and eat it. You can try to seal it again. It may be that you didn't get just a little bit of that jam off the top of it. Generally, I don't have any problems. As long as you get that jam off all that rim, 9 times out of 10, you're not going to have any problem. This particular one is the one that we're going to put right in the refrigerator after it cools. I can tell it's already starting to set well, so I guess we'll see tomorrow.
So how long do you think they would last, like the ones that seal well? How long should they last on the shelf, you think?
All the books say a year. We've eaten them up to a year and a half to 2 years, and they're fine. My grandmother had they used to call it the root cellar. And she canned all of her life. Now, when she passed away, we pulled stuff out of her canning root cellar that was black and you couldn't tell what it was. So you don't want to eat that stuff. But even up to a couple of years, if it looks good, you open it, it smells good. Think of it as a canned, anything in your pantry that's a can. You'll let some of that stuff sit 2 years before you eat it. It's the same process. This just happens to be a glass jar and you can see what's in it. Hi, it's the day after. Now we can look at the jars and see how they're doing. If you can, I don't know that you can tell really well, but there's no give in any of these jars. That way you know that they are sealed and they're ready to go. This one is the one that I didn't can, but you can see that it gives. And that will tell you that it is not sealed. So occasionally you might pull these out of your hot water bath. They may sit and cool, and you come back to them and one of them is giving. That means that one for some reason did not seal. You might have left a little bit on the jar rim or for whatever reason. If that happens, put it in the fridge, let that be the first one you eat. Or if you want to, you can go to the trouble of reheating it and recanning it, resealing it. We always just use that as the first one we eat. It works out fine. But I thought I would go ahead and let you see what the product ends up looking like. Here's your jam on a cracker. And it's good stuff. Oops. Yum, yum. Thanks for joining us. Hopefully we'll see you again soon.